Hello and welcome to Pastoral Counselling. My name is Dr. Neil Soggie, and I will be your instructor for this course. What I want to do in this first lecture is just talk a little bit about what pastoral counseling is. There are 5 terms currently in use that describe pastoral counseling in its broad sense, and I want to speak in that broad strokes kind of idea to start with. Because in the broad sense, pastoral counseling is helping a person to experience the fullness of life through some kind of helping relationship. And it takes from the idea in John chapter 10, verses 10 through to 11, where Jesus says, "I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd." And here Jesus is speaking of himself. But as pastors, we take this idea and this idea of the call to care for the sheep of Christ and to care for the community of Christ in helping ways. And that's the general kind of broad strokes image that we can have of pastoral counseling. Now, within that umbrella of generic pastoral counseling, there are those 5 terms. The very first one I want to speak about just very shortly is pastoral care. We hear that term pastoral care. What exactly do we mean by that? That really describes the care that a pastor provides to an individual through their pastoral presence, by simply being there, by being a representation of Christ, but also by being having supportive interactions with an individual and being nurturing in that relationship. And normally the context for that is in a church or denominational community that we have pastoral care. But that can fit very nicely under that larger umbrella of pastoral counseling. Another term that can be applied is spiritual care. And this describes the care that a specialized caregiver normally provides through a pastoral presence or through interaction and support. And the context and nature of the relationship between the provider of spiritual care and the care receiver helps to define this. So, for example, there would be some commonality between a spiritual care provider in a prison or in a hospital, but there are obviously going to be some very distinct differences as well. Either way, this can rightly be included under that broad umbrella of pastoral care and counseling. Then we can look at a more narrow definition of pastoral counseling. So pastoral counseling, as the third term, can be narrowed to apply to a pastor who is counseling an individual in a context that implies greater confidentiality and greater structure than simply being a pastor for this person would imply. Another term is Christian counseling. If it's applied in a more narrowed focus, it does not necessarily mean a pastoral role, but one where the narrowed, more specific therapeutic relationship is deliberately informed for both the counselor and the client by Scripture and by the person and work of Jesus Christ. And then finally, we come to that final of the 5 terms, pastoral psychotherapy. Pastoral psychotherapy is one where there is a permutation of the approaches looked at within the therapeutic relationship. The main difference here from, say, a narrow definition of pastoral counseling is that pastoral counseling would typically look at those issues that are readily accessible to the conscious awareness of the client and would look at thoughts having to do with the relationships out there and look at reframing and interpreting those relationships and the meanings therein. By contrast, pastoral psychotherapy is interested in bringing about awareness of previously unrecognized emotional processes or unrecognized feelings or behaviors. And oftentimes, that focus can be facilitated by looking at what is simply going on in the therapeutic relationship itself, rather than, by contrast with the narrow definition of pastoral counseling, looking at what's going out there in the real world. You can simply look at what's going on in the interaction between the client and the therapist and get some understanding and start to explore what is going on in the unconscious part of the mind for that individual. So, in summary, just as I mentioned before, pastoral counseling in a broad sense is helping a person to experience the fullness of life through a number of approaches. And we can narrow this down into 5 various areas: pastoral care, spiritual care, pastoral counseling, Christian counseling, and of course, pastoral psychotherapy.